Okay, we are now recording and live on YouTube.
All right, I'd like to call to order the Committee of the Whole on this April 26, 2021. Would the acting city manager please call the roll?
Ms. Averett?
Here.
Ms. Stancorp Taylor?
Here.
Mr. Delgado?
Here.
Mr. Green?
Here.
Mr. Leroy?
Here.
Mr. O'Reilly?
Here.
Mayor Hoffmeister?
Here. All right, the first order of business is the discussion of the Clark Avenue Street Reconstruction Project.
Okay. So we had streets and roads meeting last week, and out of that meeting, Streets and Roads had a recommendation to move forward with the reconstruction of Clark Avenue. So I just wanted to give council a brief update on that, what that project will look like, and then allow you to ask any questions that you have at the end. We estimate that Clark Avenue reconstruction project will cost $600,000. Of that $600,000, $538,000 of it would be road construction costs. That $538,000 broken down to $420,000 for street construction and $138,000 for water main replacement. So this project would include the complete reconstruction of the road, the water main, curbs, and driveway aprons. Just to let you know how we would fund this project, is it's going to be funded, $420,000 of that would come from the Streets and Roads budget. That is the 220 account. So just so you understand where that money comes from, that is the gas tax, license fees. So that's where that money comes from. That money will then go towards this project. We will do an additional appropriation later in the summer of about $150,000. We had $400,000 budgeted, but at the time we did that budget, we didn't have the reconstruction project in there. So that additional appropriation will come from that 220 account. The rest of the dollars will be funded from the water fund. The water fund has enough cash in it. The water plant debt will be paid off this within a couple months, and so there will be enough cash in that fund to cover the water side of the project. Our anticipation is to advertise this project here potentially this week, open bids on May 12th, and so I'm hopeful that we would be back in front of council at the May council meeting for your approval for the contract. We would hope to start the project in June, shortly after school lets out. Clark Avenue, just for those of you who don't know, is one of the major connecting routes between Springfield Pike and Elm. And a lot of the students who come and go from Elm School use Clark Avenue. So our goal would be to start the project shortly after school ends and complete most of the project before school begins in the fall. If it's not completed completely, it should be done within a few weeks of school beginning. So that's a little bit about the project. Does anybody have any questions?
So it's a very short street then, if it's only going to take 3 months.
Correct. It is much shorter than Ritchie.
Well, having lived through that type of project, I guess one question or one concern I would have is just it would be really nice to do everything we can to protect the street trees, because I know we lost some on Ritchie. Again, it was a much longer project, but especially if we're doing it over the summer, the roots get exposed when they take the streets down to that level. So I don't know, or maybe it was different because I think Ritchie got narrowed a little. I'm not really sure, but it's just something we should, sort of be proactive about. Like, I think even just telling homeowners, you might want to water your street trees when I guess that's something urban forestry could talk about, because I'm not an expert on that, but.
We do have the guidelines that we received from urban forestry, so we'll use those as is a goal for ours to help educate the homeowners about protecting the trees. There are a couple trees on that street that are that will be a challenge that we may potentially lose because of their proximity to the roadway. One of them actually almost encroaches out into the roadway. So if you look there, the curbs are just pretty much gone. So Terry might be able to answer that better, but we'll do what we can. And also communicating with the homeowners. I've actually spoken with most of the homeowners already about the concept. We will have a pre-construction meeting with them, and we will try to educate all of them again at that meeting. So that is our plan, at least.
Okay.
Yeah, there are actually 3 trees that have been identified that will be coming down. One's an ash tree. It's in bad shape. There is a poplar that's got declining health in the center of it, and a sycamore tree that's actually leaning out over the street now that is questionable. Everything else, we do address tree maintenance for the contractor to stay on top of it, and to be as careful as we can. We do it on every contract, and we'll go through that. And then there's always the pre-con meeting that we invite everybody on the street. We do it for every project. Not everybody shows up, but we talk through, and they'll know if their tree's coming down. And just like in Ritchie, we identified trees before construction, and you're correct. We did lose a couple during construction, and I think it was a combination of the weather and with the curb placement, how close we had them to the curb. So we did lose some during construction, but we try not to. And that's all been addressed even in the specs. So.
Okay, great. It just, as someone who's been through it, I would just emphasize as much communication as possible with the homeowners. I mean, 3 months isn't horrible, but it's stressful to have your street torn up like that. And I know, a lot of people got flat tires. I don't know I got several. People complained about, I mean, there was this one piece of equipment that would make your house shake, and, just you don't expect all that stuff to happen. So if you're communicating, I would just talk to them as much as possible so they know what to expect, or I'll talk to them.
Well, I started that with reaching out to all the homeowners. Like I said, I've touched base with, I believe, all of them but 2 already, to let them know what the plan is. We'll touch base with them again at the pre-construction meeting, and I will try to make sure that our communication is, and that they have our phone numbers to reach out to if there's any questions, if we're not there.
Are we using the same crew as last time, or do you know? Or I guess it goes out to bid, so it could be anybody, or?
It would go out to bid, correct.
Okay.
All right.
Are there questions?
Just probably more of a reminder question. So needing this much work, how much of that is something that maybe if we've been able to keep up with maintenance a little bit better? I know there's just this list of roads that need work and due to the recession and all sorts of things. That list had time to grow. Is there anything to learn from this, like looking at the price tag and think, well, next time, if we do have the money and can put it toward roads earlier rather than later, that could save us in the long run?
There are streets that you can save money if you do the mill and overlay ahead of time. The problem with Clark, if you look at it, it was actually overlaid at least twice in previous years before I've been part of the city. And because of that, they've actually had to put pipe in the street so that people wouldn't drag their cars coming out of the driveways. It wasn't done the way we do business today. So this one is a reconstruct that we've had on the list for quite some time. But you look at Allen right next door. If we can get that milled and overlaid in the next 2 or 3 years, you can give it 15, 18 more years of life. So yes, there are ways of saving some money, but not on this street in particular. No.
Thanks, Terry.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, we can move on now to the next item of business, which is in-person meetings. Before we start that discussion, just a point of clarification. Rusty, if we go in person, we're still going to be on YouTube, correct?
So if we go in person, our council chambers is set up to stream YouTube. So as long as any meetings we have that we want to stream are in the council chambers, then we can go live on YouTube.
Okay. So I'd like to get everyone's input to see what they want to do. I've heard a concern of at least one resident. I think the president might have emailed everyone, but I've heard concern about a request for in-person meetings from one resident. But I'd want to hear from everyone what their take is on in-person meetings. Go ahead, Jeff, you can start.
I thought you said you wanted to hear from one resident first.
No. I've heard from one resident. And I want to hear from you all first. I want to hear from you all first, yes.
About in-person meetings?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, here's my personal opinion. I'll just throw it out there. I got vaccinated in the trial last summer. I know that some people, I don't know who on this call has been vaccinated, who hasn't. I continue to wear my mask everywhere I'm supposed to go. My personal opinion is if there's no incentive to getting vaccinated, what was the point of getting vaccinated? And so if everybody's been vaccinated, that's a big if, I don't know. I feel like we should be able to meet in person if everybody in that room has been vaccinated. Otherwise, what was the point of the vaccine? So if people have not been vaccinated, then that's a different topic of discussion. But if everybody on council or working for the city who would attend the meeting has been vaccinated, my mindset is the science says the vaccine works. So we should be able to meet in person. That's kind of where I stand now, but I have an open mind.
Can I jump in with one thing real quick, Mayor?
Yeah.
Just keep in mind that our ability to conduct meetings virtually ends July 1st, regardless of what decisions are made here tonight. So the measure that was passed by the Ohio General Assembly is only good through July 1st, and it is not expected to be extended. So we will be in person after July 1st. I think the question is whether or not you want to be in person prior to that. And also keep in mind that while council is required to meet in person, the right of the public is the right to view, not the right to actually attend. So council also has an option of being able to limit or exclude the public from those meetings if there is a concern regarding the number of people in council chambers.
And I'm going to throw it out there that we begin we begin in open sessions in person after July 1st.
I'm fine with that.
My rationale is we're coming up on a couple of months that it's always difficult because people are going on vacation. And I know in the past we've had some difficulty trying to even get a quorum together in the month of June. So I'm just, after July 1st, I think would meet the letter of the law, and then we can begin.
Does that work for you? What do you think, Nancy?
I don't have any plans for a vacation yet. Things are too in flux for me personally. So I don't have any problem meeting in June in person. I would just ask that that when people are not speaking, they wear a mask. Because I think even though, well, I know I'm vaccinated and Jeff and Sarah, and I think most of us are, our vaccines are not 100%. So I think it's important to practice good etiquette in terms of, and I don't know about the public. I mean, if we're going to allow the public, they absolutely should be wearing masks, but it's not that big of a room. So I think, I don't know. I'm not sure how to address that and still have, social distancing.
Because of right now, Rusty, correct me if I'm wrong, if you walk in the city building, the public walks in the city building, they have to have a mask on.
Well, right now, that's correct, but it would be for the Board of Health to manage that requirement to wear a mask. So I would also tell you that if you space people out by the 6-foot rule, we kind of looked at it. If you maintain the 6 foot, you can get about 23 people, not counting. That would be with all of council sitting up on the dais. You could get about 23 people in the room.
So Rusty, I heard this morning the CDC was coming out with new guidelines for meeting if you've been vaccinated. I don't think they've come out with that yet, but we can't ask people if they've been vaccinated. I guess that's my question, right? So if people show up to attend a council meeting in person, we would have to let them in regardless of their vaccine status. Is that correct?
We would not be able to ask them if they're vaccinated. So yes, we would have to let them in regardless. My thought would be, if you're going to do in person, that you're going to let the first 23 people in, and then after that, you're going to tell them they got to watch it on YouTube.
But Emily just said we don't have to let any public in, correct?
Well, that's just if you're allowing people in. That's correct. If you're going to allow one person, my thought is you need to allow up to that spacing requirement, and then you could say. My thought would also be that for a period of time, you could tell people that they have to wear a mask or to watch it on YouTube.
So we could meet in person, but tell people if they want to watch, they have to go to YouTube?
That's correct.
That is correct.
I don't see the real advantage of us meeting in person and people being able to watch on YouTube. I think it's either all or nothing. I just don't really like the hybrid approach. The concern about the masks is if we have to wear masks, we should wear them all the time, because the time you're exposing yourself to others is when the mask is off your face when you're talking. So I don't think that makes a whole lot of sense to keep your mask on when you're not talking and take it off when you are talking. I can tell you, as someone that's experienced this firsthand, this is a vicious disease. Right now, the county is on the red level, which means that we have to limit activities as much as possible. I'm not a fan of just picking an arbitrary date in the future. I would like to see this tied specifically to the Ohio Department of Health and wait until we get to a yellow phase. At that point, once we're yellow, then I think we open it up to the general public and we open it up to ourselves. But just simply picking an arbitrary date of June or July or August and not looking at the data, not looking at the facts, not looking at what the Ohio guidelines are.
We have to do it by July. That's what the legislature said, Zach.
It's being irresponsible.
We can't wait until it's yellow. Emily just said we have to do it after July 1st because the legislature is not going to extend allowing us to have virtual meetings. So it absolutely has to happen after July 1st. Is what you're saying, Emily. We have to meet in person.
We have to meet in person.
Right.
And under the charter, we're required to meet every month. So we will be back in person in July. But the question.
Emily, just a question. Do you think that whenever the July 1st deadline, you believe there'll be guidelines established by those regulations?
I don't. I think that from at the state level, the guidelines have become more relaxed, not stricter. I believe just the general, the director's most recent order, which if you were following, the governor recently rescinded all the orders, or the health director of health rescinded all the orders that were issued last year, combined them into one order that is a little less stringent, but still has, the mask requirement and social distancing and all those things in it. I think the governor is going to leave it up to the individual communities, and the director of health is going to leave it up to the individual communities to determine what safety measures it puts in place to conduct its public meetings.
Can I hear Jim? What are your views on going back?
I've spent many hours on this. Just got acceptance this week for the book on vaccines. We're coming out with a new edition of our textbook on COVID-19. So many hours have gone into it. I agree with the CDC. The significant content that has led to most cases has been indoor airborne droplets. Indoor airborne droplets can be reduced by people wearing masks and or by substantial improvements in the ventilation of the room so that when the person exhales, there will be fresh air coming in to remove it. It's unlikely that our building, the 800 building, unlikely our building will have the upgrade. So we will have to have a strict mask requirement. We'll have to insist on that mask requirement, even though we will get some feedback. My preference is to meet in person. My preference is to meet in person with masks. And I think we have a lot to learn from the expression of people we're acting with. As they say, I don't like that, or they grimace. It's better for us to have that in-person interaction. Recognizing also there are some people who, for physiological reasons, would be at graver risk with what's called long COVID, persons who recovered from COVID. So I'm concerned. I'm concerned. I think we will probably be going back in a mask-only situation and not permit people into the audience who are not wearing masks. That's what I think.
So are you, after, what, don't wait till after July 1st?
Yes, I would wait until after July 1st.
Okay.
Emily, what would be the penalty if we still chose to meet virtually after July 1st? Like, what exactly would happen at that point in time?
It would be a violation of the Open Meetings Act. We'd be subject to being sued.
Okay.
Sarah?
So I personally am very eager to get back to be in person. I think, as Jim mentioned, there is a lot you can see on people's faces. I think it would be good for all of us to be back in the same room together with some big decisions coming up. That said, I do hear Zach's concerns, especially someone who survived COVID. So I understand wanting to wait as long as we can legally. I do think we should require masks if we're meeting in person. And depending on what the rules are, sounds like in July, if we are required to meet in person, perhaps depending on what the rates are, where the county is at that point, we could have audience at home for the first couple of months, unless, with more people getting vaccinated, the rates look better. Would we be able to make that choice, Emily, after July, to have audience members viewing from home?
Yes.
Or a limited number in the room, depending on what it looks like.
You can frankly fluctuate. If there's another spike, you could go back to excluding the public at some point in time. We would just need to make sure that when we notice our meetings, we let people know how they can access the meeting, whether it's in person or if it's only by the YouTube channel.
Mm-hmm. So Emily, the other cities that you work with or just are aware of in the area, how have they navigated this? I think you mentioned at least one continued meeting in person. Were they open to the public in that room, or was the public coming in virtually?
So I've had the full spectrum of COVID measures, from virtually none to very stringent. I have a couple of communities that have met in person throughout the course of the pandemic. One of them was very strict and stringent about mask wearing and social distancing within their chambers. Mm-hmm. One not as much as I would have liked to, and I frankly zoomed into those meetings. Mm-hmm. But that being said, each community has to look at its own facilities, look at how much space they have, look at how their community best interacts with council. You know, how many people in that community have access to the technology that it would take to actually be able to meaningfully participate in meetings. And I think those decisions have been based on that. So I think for Wyoming's purposes, you know, I think your community has dealt very well with still participating with your meetings remotely. At some point in time, though, obviously we'll have to go back in person. And I think the question will be for you is do you allow the public into the room, or you kind of just take it on a month-to-month basis and make that decision as you go along?
And Rusty, in terms of the actual council meetings themselves, with the technology we have, how would public comment work? Do we have a screen where we can see the public when they're on Zoom? If we had the community not in the room with us, but they were participating online, how would they be able to give comment?
I'd have to talk to Emily to see what we're going to allow, but Emily, why don't you answer what we would have to do first, and I'll tell you how we would handle it.
The only thing the city has to do is stream the meeting live.
So what I would tell you is that as far as the public comment, the YouTube is not set up for that. We're not allowing comments on YouTube. So my thought would be that if we wanted to go down that path, if someone wanted to be able to comment, we'd have them email me or someone in particular on staff, and then we would read those comments if that was desired of council. I also considered, just so you all know, when I say there's 23 that could fit in the room, we could also have staff all down in the conference room watching it on YouTube. And if staff was needed to come into the meeting, they could just walk up the hall and come into the meeting. So staff wouldn't necessarily have to absorb part of that 23 number.
I can't imagine not having the ability to make comment. Say there's some hot topic going on in the community. If we've shifted due to legal requirements and due to health reasons, don't have people in the room, even if all of those reasons are very legitimate and what is required of us, if there's no way of speaking directly to us when people feel passionately about something, I can see that going south pretty quickly. So I think we need to think through how to do that.
That you could allow, we are set up to allow a certain number of people to come into council. So I think you can feel assured that, as I said, we can fit 23 people in there. Now, if you decide to not allow anyone into council, that's a whole nother thing that we got to address. But I believe you could comfortably fit 23 people in there. Maybe it's where we take who's going to make comment and allow those 23 in, everybody else watch. I mean, most of the time we don't have that many people in council. So most of the time it's not going to be an issue.
We also have the opportunity to meet individually around the edges of the gazebo and have people in chairs watching us. We would, during July, August, and September, have relatively good weather for an evening meeting. And that could be a way to resolve the need to have an in-person meeting and observations. I don't recommend it in the winter, but it's one of the ways in which we could accommodate the post-July 1st.
I don't know if I like that idea, Jim. I see people walking by, crowds forming, people just shouting stuff at us. I don't know if it would be how we would maintain order and discipline where, and I don't mean that in a rudimentary or a regimented way, but, you know, we require people to say who they are and where they live in the city. And I picture a lot of people forming and just kind of getting out of hand. I don't know.
Throwing vegetables.
I have this vision in my mind, and I don't know. I might be wrong, but I think there's some risk with that.
Rusty, I've got a question, and that is that if we opened up, I'm just pretending now, so don't hold me to anything I say, anyone. But if we opened up in July, And we allowed 20 people to come in because we would have 2 additional staff members or 3, and our capacity is at 23. And we find that we need to have a larger capacity. Can we move our venue to the Civic Center? Would that be an opportunity for us?
We could always move our venue, but the ability to record it on YouTube, we would lose that.
Okay, but we would have the capacity. We would have the capacity to have more folks, right?
Correct.
So if we had,
I would also have to tell you, we would have to start blocking that facility. We're renting that facility, and the other challenge you're going to have there is our other things are starting to come back online. So I think something else council will have to consider is how much else things in the community are starting to come back online, and our reaction to that as well. The Civic Center rentals are starting to book up. People are looking at the new restrictions and looking to use that space. So I don't know that facility, we would have to block it now to ensure that we had all of our council meetings space there to have it.
Anyone else want to be heard on this issue? Well, it looks like the majority of folks want to wait till after July, and majority of folks want people to wear masks inside. So that's what we'll do. We will hold in-person meetings after July. We'll require masks or shields for people who are going to be in attendance. And unless we get further guidance from the state or from the Board of Health, we may have to change. But from what I hear, it seems like that's what folks want to do.
But you can't. But hang on, you can't do it after July, because after July 1st, we have to meet in person. So July meeting has to be in person.
Yeah, after July 1st in person.
Okay, you just said after July, so it sounded like you meant August.
No. July meeting will be in person.
Okay.
Yeah, in person.
Sorry, that is my ear tripped up there. We're requiring masks or shields.
Yes, or shields.
Are those like equivalent in terms of, sorry, what sort of shield do you mean? Do you mean like plastic barriers around us, or?
No, the thing is, I like to use a shield when I speak, because I speak in front of a large group of people. It's kind of hard with the mask to talk sometimes for people to hear you. So I use a shield when I speak.
Like one on your face?
Yes, I use a face shield.
Okay, sorry. I'm sure your kids over at the middle school, they're carrying around.
I know exactly. No, I didn't mean that kind of shield. No, just the kind of the face shield.
Okay. And frankly, I don't know how easy it's going to be to understand me with a mask covering my mouth. So I may have to think through some adaptation too. Maybe get one clear patch.
All right, move on to temporary signage. Turn over to Emily.
Sure. As council may recall, we just had some discussions last fall about the temporary sign code. And I've worked with Megan and taken some of the suggestions that I made last fall. And I think, Megan, if you want to share your screen, you can see the proposed changes. This is not any sort of substantive change to what we currently have. These changes are intended to do 2 things. To first make the temporary sign code, and these are temporary signs in residential districts. The goal is to make the temporary sign provisions easier to understand and to ensure content neutrality in our temporary sign provisions to ensure that we're compliant with First Amendment requirements. As we discussed, I believe that the provisions as written are content neutral and are constitutional. But in order to make a couple of clarifications, these are the suggested amendments. The first has to do with the definition of temporary sign. The previous definition would have been a temporary sign is a sign that is used only for a short, specifically limited time and is not permanently mounted. There was some confusion regarding the definition as to how you determine if something is for a specifically limited time period. Meaning, do you have to read the content of the sign to determine if it is for a limited time period, or is it because of how the sign is constructed that it is intended to be for a limited period of time? And obviously, if you're looking at something, a sign from a content neutral basis, you do not want to have to read what the sign says to determine whether or not a regulation applies. So the first change would be to change the definition to clarify that we're talking about the actual nature of the sign, how it is constructed, that it is something that is intended to be temporary, not permanent. The second change has to do with the number of signs that are permitted. Currently, there are 4 signs that are permitted, but that also includes the house number to the residents, which causes some confusion for residents when they are trying to determine how many signs they can have in a yard. And the recommendation here is to simply allow them to have 4 temporary signs and remove having the house number count as one of those signs. And it also goes ahead and deletes some language about whether those signs can be commercial or non-commercial in nature. Again, we don't want to have to read the sign to determine what rule applies. We really want to look to the number, the size, the location, things that are not content-based. So this would remove the distinction between signs that advertise a commercial activity versus ones that do not. And the same kind of restriction is done in the next subsection as well.
Emily, without going too in depth, because I know it's a very complex, packed with law here.
Yeah.
But just can you make sure everybody's on the same sheet of music? When you use that phrase, content neutral, can you just kind of give examples of what you mean exactly when you say content neutral?
Right. So rules that are content neutral. So they're content based and content neutral. Content based means that the regulation applies because of what the message is that is written on the sign. So you have to read it, and certain signs get different treatment based on what it says. And kind of the most common issue you see with this is that in a lot of zoning codes, about 15 or 20 years, a lot of zoning codes distinguished between signs that were political in nature and signs that advertised commercial or a real estate sign, and provisions that had different rules depending on what the sign said were found to be unconstitutional. So a content-based sign is one where the content of the sign determines what the rule is. Content neutral means that the only thing we are regulating, we don't even have to look at what's written on the sign to know if it's violating a rule. Content neutral rule is going to be the number of signs you can have, the size of the signs, where they are located, and those have been found to be content neutral provisions that would pass constitutional muster, that they simply have to pass a rational basis test, and which is fairly easy to do, given the aesthetic concerns and traffic concerns regarding the number and location of signs in residential districts.
Thanks.
So, and then the last provision, the last recommendation is to remove a provision that limited how long a sign that advertised a non-commercial event, how long it could be posted. And again, this is another example where in order to know if that rule applies, you have to read the sign and see what it says and then apply the rule. And again, we're trying to avoid anything that is even arguably content-based. So that provision would be removed. The last thing I want to say is I know that there was some discussion about, dealing specifically with other issues and school signs and other signs. And I think that at some point in time, if council wants to kind of dive into that discussion again, we can. The purpose for these tonight is to start the process just to clean this up a little bit, to ensure that these sign provisions can be easily administered, and I don't have to kind of have conversations with lawyers about whether or not they're content-based or content neutral. So that's it. There really aren't that many changes. And the next step for this would be to go ahead and refer this to Planning Commission from here.
Can I comment?
Yep, Jim.
Yeah, we spent many hours on this 14 years ago. As a council and as a planning commission, we did the best we could at the time, but certainly the case law has changed and moved on. I'm going to come out and agree with the modifications that have been made. I will point out that the definition in 13310117 would make it possible for a person with a flag, for example, an unnamed presidential person, president number 45, had his flags all over the place. The flag is made from a material that's intended to last for months, whatever the flag is worth. And I'd be concerned if we left it on the physical nature of the signage. I want to get some clarification there that it would be, if you will, call it paper, call it something that would be destructible rather than something that is a flag. With that exception, I'm very much in support of it.
Yeah, Jim, our definition of sign in general, the way it is written, would include flags. This is an issue that Megan and I have had many discussions about. And I think here at some point in time, we're going to have a more robust conversation about how we deal with flags. Because obviously, as you know, we can't distinguish between the American flag and any other flag. So we don't certainly want to limit anyone's right to express patriotic sentiments, but that means that all flags can be flown, right?
Emily, I did also have a question on the material. So that it's made from a material meant to last only for a short, limited time. Like even just your standard yard signs, like that corrugated plastic, that can last. I mean, I have some in my garage; they're years and years old. Yeah. So, like, I just like, how enforceable is this really? Or is that the goal, not really to be enforceable?
Well, the goal is to find a way to distinguish between a permanent sign. So we all know what a permanent sign is. We know what that looks like when we see it. It is built of, it is built to last. It probably is mounted. The materials being used are construction materials. So by saying that it's intended to, it's made from material meant to last only for a short, limited time, we are talking about, plastic, paper, cardboard, even fabric. I mean, those aren't permanent sign making materials, if that makes sense.
Okay. The other question I had was to be that last paragraph that we're keeping. Mm-hmm. I wonder, so governmental, I understand what that means, but institutional uses located in a premises within a residential zoning district. So what does that include? Is that businesses? Is that churches? Like what's an institutional use?
Megan, you can correct me if I'm wrong, because Megan's the person who applies this, but there are certain types of uses permitted in residential districts that are not residential. Those are primarily the schools, churches, and government buildings.
That's correct.
So the school could put out a banner saying like, you know, a book drive.
They can
up to 90 days.
Yeah, they can have a larger sign. One, they can have one that is larger in size, and they can have one that for a limited time period. And a lot of that has to do with the scale of the property and structure as compared to residential uses.
Thank you.
A distinction is we do require temporary sign permits for those larger signs, whereas we don't for residential specifically.
Any other questions? Okay, we'll move on to miscellaneous. Sarah, do you have anything?
Are we?
Actually, Mayor, you might have we're going to have to come out of executive session towards the end. So we have an updated agenda. So we have miscellaneous at number 6 now. So next,
going to executive?
Yeah, next we would go into executive session.
Okay. Do we need a motion to go to executive session?
So moved.
Wait, we need to identify the purposes. So there are 2 executive session matters. The first is a property matter under section 121.03B2 of the codified ordinances to consider the transfer of property, and also under section 121.03B1 of the codified ordinance to discuss the appointment, employment, and compensation of a public official.
Okay.
Now you can say so moved.
Okay. So moved.
All those in favor?
No, we need to do it. Sorry, we need to do a roll call.
And it's the Ohio Revised Code, right?
Now it's
No,
No?
Oh, I'm sorry. You're right. We're in committee of the whole. It is the Ohio Revised Code. So it's 121.22 G2 and 121.22 G1.
Do you need me to move again?
Yes, please.
Yeah. So moved under the Ohio Revised Code. Emily?
Second?
second.
All right, it's been moved and seconded. Would the acting city manager please call the vote?
Favorite,
Yes.
Stancorp Taylor,
Yes.
Mr. Delgado,
Yes.
Mr. Green,
Yes.
Mr. Leroy,
Yes.
Mr. O'Reilly. Mr. O'Reilly? Okay. He said yes. And Mayor Hoffmeister?
Yes.
All right, for those that are not part of the executive session, I can put you in the waiting room. And if you're still there when we come out, you can come back in. Is that everybody?
Yeah.
We're good there, right? I don't see anybody else. Okay, Chris is on. All right, so let me stop the recording and turn off YouTube.